Good morning, everyone. Good. That was a quick one. Well, Loretta's glad to see me. Good morning, everyone. Happy Lord's Day. That's even better. That's right. So, very glad to see you guys here with us this morning. We're going to continue on with Hebrews, but I did want to mention one thing. We've kind of experimented a little bit without using the handheld mic, for audience members to make comments and things like that. Feedback is it's being a little bit difficult to hear, maybe a lot difficult for some people to hear. So we're going to go back to doing the mic. We're going to do that. We're thinking that's going to help a bit. But here's the thing: we're going to do it as quickly as possible. But that means you need to wait for the mic to get to you. So please raise your hand if you got a comment or. Now, I haven't been a performer, but as I've heard performers say, you need to kiss the mic. Now, if you don't actually have laying on of lips, that could be good, but the idea for that was you need to have it real close, because if you back off a little bit, it just fades out. We got some good sound people back here, and they can adjust that sound to pick up a little bit, but they can only work with what you give them. So if you're louder, that's better. They can turn it down easy enough, but if you don't give them enough, it just messes up, and that's when you hear the screeching and all this, because they're trying to adjust for you. So main thing, if you've got comments, things like that, we don't want to have you not say things or ask questions, but raise your hand and we'll get that mic to you so we can do that. So, and then just hold them close. If you're sitting next to the person that's not holding it close, it's okay to just reach over and go like this. Like that. So, brothers and sisters, watch out for each other. So, that's right. So, anyway, so with that, we're going to get into Hebrews, but I want to tell a little story. That's right, Susan. I always got a little story. So, when I was young, in high school, there was a time that when I had gone to a new school, I was brand new. This is days that I had been there. And it came a day that there was a protest, an area-wide protest, protesting something that was going on. The detail of that doesn't really matter for a class this morning, but there's a protest. So everybody is getting together, the students are all getting together, and come on. So one of the things was, I was there on campus, and so I'm being urged, come on, let's go. We got to go talk to the principal. We're going to the office, we're going to talk to him. So there I am, with however big of a group it was, there in the principal, with the principal, and once it started a little bit, he looked straight at me. He just said, well, Ed, why are you here? It was comfortable being in the crowd. But he just asked, why are you here? So I gave some feeble answer that wasn't really relevant, didn't matter. So the quick answer was, Ed, go back to class. And then he talked to them. He didn't belittle anybody. He was willing to listen to them, listen to what they needed to say. But you need to know what you were doing and why you were doing it. So then as the year went on, and other protests, and so I learned from that. I need to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I have to account for it. So as the year went on, there were some other protests that came up. And then there's this big pull, peer pressure. Peer pressure is tough, especially at a younger age. Peer pressure is tough. This big pull about, let's go, we're going. We're going and doing that. And I learned that if this was not something that I stood for, I didn't need to be in the crowd. Being in the crowd was not necessarily the right thing to do. Was that tough? Absolutely. This is one of these, oh my goodness, everybody's going, what's 100%? But it was we probably had 85% walk out. Large group. And boy, you really had to, there was a lot of pressure. Every single time that happened, a lot of pressure. And you had to make your decision. What were you going to do? Were they right or wrong? Not worried about that right now. What I'm really focusing on is, was it right for me? And I decided that it wasn't, so I stayed there. But did I feel that peer pressure? Oh man, that that was tough. To look people square in the eye and just say, I'm staying, when they felt urgent that they needed to go do this. Can you think of any times in the Bible where there was peer pressure? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nods here, yes nods. A lot of times there was peer pressure. What about the crowd when they were trying Jesus? The crowd was stirred up. That doesn't tell me every single one of them even necessarily knew exactly what was going on. But there was peer pressure. We need to go do this. And then they start chanting. Peer pressure is tough. You got to stand up to it. In Hebrews, we're hearing a little bit in a roundabout way, but if you look deep into it, we're hearing about some peer pressure that those believing Jews, those Christians, those early Christians, that they're dealing with in their lives. And as we've been dealing with in Hebrews, talking about the value of Christ and how he's better than other things. Today we're talking about him being the best high priest. That's what's in our chapter today. So I want to look back in Genesis 14, verses 18 through 20. Genesis 14, 18 through 20. So on this, just leading up to this, we won't read a whole chapter before this, but leading up to this, there had been a war. 5 kings against 4 kings. You know, we've read this not too long ago with our daily readings. 5 kings and 4 kings. The 4 kings lost. Lot and all these people are carried off, and Abram comes over and with his people and with his army, and he goes and runs them down. He beats that other army with the 5 kings and brings everything back, all of it, all the people, all the animals, all the plunder from 4 cities. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of people. And Abram brought it back. And so what happens is, when he gets back, basically it's all his. But that's not what Abram did. He basically just said, you're free, you know, for there. And then he let his men take the plunder for their share. But Abram could have had all of it. But that's not what he did. So he ends up meeting with the king of Salem. And I believe and it's not in this particular reading right here, but I believe it was also the king of Sodom was there. I don't know if one of you guys remember this, but Abram's meeting with them. And this is where we take up in verse 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. That Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. So there's been occasionally, here's a little speculation that Melchizedek wasn't a real person. This is just an idea of a high priest or something like that. Really, we're given here and a couple of other examples that the people there living right then, the way that they responded to and dealt with Melchizedek, he's a real king. He's a real person. They recognized him. They knew who he was. And yet they're giving him the accolades of being high priest. We don't have Levitical priests yet. The Israelites haven't been in Egypt, they haven't left, so Aaron and all the Levitical priests that we've all been reading about recently, none of that's there yet. So this is something different. So who is Melchizedek? There's no indication of him being born. Everything in the Bible, all this stuff we've been reading, we've been reading some long lists of genealogy. There's no, and the genealogies are important. They're a good thing to have, they're a good thing to know for history's sake. But there's no history, there's no genealogy of Melchizedek. He's just there. So it's like there's no beginning. And you don't really ever hear about him being gone. There's a lot of mystery to that, but that's not the point of who Melchizedek was. So it says he was a king of Salem. So there's no genealogy for that, but people recognize him. He was a real king, in real time, a real person. So if you break it down a little bit, his name, Melchizedek, if you look back, and I don't know all the early languages, but as I'm told, Melech means king. King of Salem. Okay, he's a king. And then the last part, Zedek, means righteous. So you put those together, he's king of righteousness. And there's that idea of he's king, but he's a high priest of righteousness. So, and where is he king of? Salem. The meaning of Salem is peace. So the whole thing fits there. See, he's the king of righteousness, and that would be the king of peace. Righteous king of peace. Yeah, if you put these together, that's right. So that's who Melchizedek is and was. And so it's not just that Melchizedek met with Abram when he came back after that war. Then Abram gave him, what was it in verse 20? He gave him a tenth of everything. So he honored him. What other examples can you think of that we do a tenth? Tithing to God. Started with that older law. Do you still want the mic?
Tithing, and it started with the old law. They were supposed to give 10% of everything, not just money.
Yeah, the 10% of everything. And that's what we see Abram doing here. So Abram didn't live in Salem, and yet he's honoring Melchizedek with a tenth of everything. So they recognize him as being a king, but there's something definitely more there. They talk about the idea of him being the priest of the Most High. So he was recognized as being a definite connection to God. So this is how Abram dealt with Melchizedek. So let's jump into Hebrews. So we're in Hebrews chapter 4. It's Hebrews chapter 4, beginning in verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. So we're comparing Jesus to a high priest. At Jesus' time, we had the Levitical priests. Before this, we see an example of a great high priest with Melchizedek. So we've all been reading about this in our daily readings. Just keep stressing it. If you haven't been doing daily readings, please start. It's really some intriguing stuff that you read about as we're going through. And just a little spoiler alert, today's reading, there's 3 verses in Proverbs. Woo, it's big. It's been like 1 and 2 verses. Today there's 3 of them. So anyway, so check it out. If you haven't yet, check it out. It's good stuff. So we're dealing with Jesus being a high priest. So who were the priests then in Jesus' time? Mike, throw your hand up so we can get that mic to you because we want everybody to be able to hear.
The Levites.
The Levites. And so who are the Levites? One of the tribes of Israel. And they didn't have their own land other than, I think, 48 cities. They had cities in the immediate area around them, but they didn't have a region, a county, state, whatever you want to call it. They didn't have that. They had certain cities. Those cities were not all together. They were intentionally spread out among the whole promised land. So they were all spread out. So when groups of Christians and Israelites even, but when they were leaving there, what would happen with the Levites? Your whole county is leaving. Example. Everybody's leaving, and what's going to happen with the people in that city? A lot of them are going to go. So when you hear about Jewish people in Rome or any other city, those Levites are going to be spread out all over the place. Jerusalem's the key, but those people are everywhere, especially when they've become Christians, they've become believers. They don't have quite the same hold to Jerusalem the same way because now they've got a better promise. They're not having to go and do those sacrifices every day. They're not having to go and do all of this stuff. So they're going to be mixed in. So what I'm proposing is that those early Christians, when something would happen, when they were just in their day-to-day life, they had a huge, huge amount of peer pressure. They had a lot of Jews that were not Christians that they were neighbors with, and they were friends with, and they knew. Maybe even other family members that they knew. They had peer pressure everywhere they were. What happens with peer pressure? Loretta. We're going to raise your hand. What happens with peer pressure? You've got the mic right there for you.
You can give into it.
You can give into it, or
walk away.
What's that?
Or you can walk away.
Or you can walk away. You can do
It's
that.
usually not as easy to walk away as it is to give in.
Not easy at all. The peer pressure I talked about earlier that I dealt with, that wasn't a life or death situation, but that was tough. Really, really tough. When it wasn't just a suggestion, it was actual group peer pressure. You need to come do this. I feel like that those Christians, those early Christians, are living among other Jews. That's pretty obvious. They're feeling peer pressure like that. What are you believing that for? That guy, we got rid of him. He's gone. He's not eternal. He's gone. You need to come back. That's what they're feeling every single day. And yet we're told here in Hebrews, you got to stay strong. You got to understand who this is. So why would Jesus be a better priest. We have the Levitical priests. What did the priests do for you? We've been reading about a lot of sacrifices that they would do. And I would take my sacrifice to them. The priest would do that for me. But that's those Levitical priests. What are they doing for us?
They're healing people. They are taking demons out of people. They're doing their job.
So the Levitical priests? I don't know, did the Levitical priests heal people? Did the Levitical priests heal people?
No, but they gave permission for everybody to stone somebody if they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
So, in my understanding, the priest was the step between you and God. So they were the okay as far as you knew that God was telling them what needed to be done.
Somehow, Lord, I forgot one more thing. One of the key points is prayer, and God always do prayer 100% of His time, including reading His words. And forgive me, Wes, I forgot to tell you this. I didn't have time to read at all last week, so forgive me. I've been busy with everything going on, all my meetings and everything. But
Just keep jumping in every day, just when you can, that's great.
I got one update. Our Beaver Girls lost yesterday, so we're done for the season.
So for your question, did priests heal people? I don't recall that they did, but I do know that they were the ones that if you had leprosy or any kind of disease that kept you away from the assembly, if you thought you were cured or if you thought the disease was gone, you had to present yourself to the priest, and the priest would, much like Spring said, they would declare you fit to return to the assembly or not fit to return to the assembly.
Yeah. Or telling you if you needed it longer, if you needed to go dip in the water more, whatever you needed, they were the ones that would make that call. Oh, hold on. Mike's right here.
With the sacrifice, it also means the priests were the ones basically praying for your forgiveness. They were asking God for forgiveness on your behalf.
Yeah, they were that intercessor that you would take things to them, and they would then approach God with that. And I think they had one hand over here.
Just to go along with the cleansing of people and checking swords and sending them out until they can come back and get checked again. It's also, they're directed by God about how to identify mold and certain things in your houses and how to treat it and clean it, and so people aren't living.
Yeah, which seems like kind of so simple, except we talk about black mold now in our houses. So yeah, it's important. It's important, and they would do things like that, help keep you clean and pure.
They were slaves when they came out, so their knowledge of how the world works and how God designed the world and how to, sanitation, how to treat stuff, and He was giving them knowledge and practices that they would need going forward.
Yeah, so they had a lot of knowledge and practices, knew about things that God had blessed them with, that those teachings and understandings beyond the general public, but they also were that intercessor. You would take that for your sins, so the mold and stuff, that's physical and that's important, but they would take those sacrifices and do that for you. And I think just with the head nod, we're all going to say, and did they have to sacrifice very often? As we've been reading the last 12 weeks, all the time. I'm just astounded with the numbers. How often it happens, how many animals, it's like, oh my goodness gracious, just the logistics to keep track of all that. And yet there's an important thing that was on the Levites though, on those priests, is if they didn't do it correctly, sorted out of this gets burnt and this can be eaten and this goes to this person. All those details, if they didn't do it correctly, they were guilty of that sin. Very, very important. A lot of weight on those priests. So can I see how those priests would have a lot of rules developing over the years? Yeah, it's important. It needs to be done. You don't need to be living for those rules. Jesus brought that understanding to us. But you can see where this develops over the years with that. So that's who the priests are, because they had to keep sacrificing. So how do we see that Jesus is a better high priest? So let's start up again in verse 16, chapter 4, verse 16. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. And that's because Jesus, as we had just read, because Jesus understands what we go through. Jesus understood peer pressure. Jesus understood all these things that these people are going through. So if we go into chapter 5, Hebrews 5, every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as for the sins of the people. And no one takes this honor on himself, but receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. Aaron, the great high priest, that began the Levitical priesthood, but he was called by God. He didn't put this on him. So what we're hearing here is that Jesus was called. So from a human standpoint, really the idea from here is a lot of the Jews could be talked to their family and friends that are believers, Christian believers, and they're probably telling them, that's just a guy that was setting himself up, saying he's more important than everybody else. He's doing all that. This is addressing that, just saying, just as Aaron didn't set himself up, Aaron was called. Jesus also was called for this. It's not Jesus trying to say he's better than everybody else. It's Jesus answering the call for what needed to happen for us. Then keep going in verse 5. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." So here we have that reference to Melchizedek. We were talking about that earlier. So who is Melchizedek? That idea of no beginning, no ending. There's several different correlations that are there. So it's not saying that Melchizedek was Jesus. Not saying that. He's saying that he's in the order of Melchizedek, which is a great high priest that had that direct connection. But he was the king of righteousness, is really the idea of Melchizedek. So continue on in verse 7. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey. and was designated by God to be the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So what is this writer telling us? He's writing to those early Christians, Jewish Christians, Jews that have been converted. They've done that. They know the Levitical priests. They've done all this stuff, sacrifices. This is in their being of what they do. And he's drawn a correlation to Jesus being a high priest, except it's in the order of Melchizedek. It's not the Levitical priest that he's drawn a correlation with. He's going back to Melchizedek, and these people would know who that is. And that's why it's a good thing for us to, not that there's a lot of verses on Melchizedek, but understanding the idea of what does that mean? It's not just being a good high priest. This is like a whole nother level. So, Wes.
The whole purpose of chapter 4 and then 7 also goes into more about Melchizedek is it's establishing the authority and the right of Jesus' priesthood. We understand his lineage through David makes him king. We understand that a prophet can come from any source that God appoints. I mean, even we have this weird situation a couple of times where God speaks to people who are, by all mode of character and lineage, not a good choice by our estimation, but he speaks to Jonah, he speaks to Balaam. So prophet we get, priest is a little harder to go, how in the world is Jesus a priest when he's not from the proper tribe? This is supposed to be descendants of Aaron exclusively. And so the Hebrews writer really does set up this precedent where he shows it's not without precedent that God just appoints some priests. He appointed Melchizedek. This is not somebody usurping. This is not somebody trying to butt their nose in like Saul did when Saul was king and not priest and tried to offer sacrifice. And God said, nuh-uh. This is God saying, this is my approved person doing the thing I want him to do. He's Messiah. He's Son of God. He is prophet. He is priest. He is king. And this is the argument for priest.
Yeah, and it's drawing it away from the Levitical priests that they all knew probably had some living near them in town, almost anywhere where they were in the world. Those Levitical priests were intentionally throughout the population.
Oh, I just reading through all this, and it almost kind of helps us understand there may have always been a high priest. Because the statement that he makes here that it's a requirement of God, he says, for every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relationship to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sin. There's always been sin. There's always needed to be some kind of connection between man and God, and so we read about an order of priests that were prior to Moses, to the law of Moses. That priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, was special only for the people of Israel. It wasn't set up for us. It wasn't set up for people before. So, but we see there was a priesthood before them, before Aaron, and so I think it's just like Wes said. It's the tie-in. Jesus is everything, and so God requires a high priest, and now Jesus is our high priest. He just happens to sit at the right hand of God, which is even better because,
That's
we
even
can't
better.
ask for a better.
Any other priest.
And it talks about his ability to, to talk to God and to work with God to forgive us of our sins. Constantly, he does it because we constantly sin, man. We see it in the world today, but there's nothing greater than that. I mean, why would you want to turn back to a Levitical priesthood? And, you know, that was not necessarily done properly. They had to see it during their time. You know, Jesus went into the temple and had to cleanse it out because of the people that were in there selling animals. They weren't doing it properly. Things weren't being done properly. So, and you know, people can see that as well. So why would you want to turn back to that type of thing when you have the perfect priest? You know.
Yeah. So you,
Proves that he's also the sacrifice.
that he's also the sacrifice. That's right. Susan?
Also, when you mention priest, it's also the same thing as the Catholic priest. So I don't know which one are we going through. Yeah.
Definitely jumping and grabbing and
Yeah.
reaching and exalting itself.
Yeah, the Catholic priest is going to jump in himself, right? It's not, that's a separate thing. And again, it's from a worldly priesthood, which is not what Jesus is. So if I've got a Levitical priest, and then I've got a priest that has gone through the same stuff that I've gone through, he can relate to me. He understands the peer pressure I've got. He understands the pain of losing someone, the pain of, you know, everything that I go through. And as it turns out, he's at the right hand of God. He's even higher. He's not of this Levitical priest. He's much, much higher. It's, I think Wes said it, it's conveniently located. That's way better. It's like, why do I want to get back? Why do I want to get back that? And so on the physical standpoint, why do I want to get back to that Judaism with the Levitical priests? It's like, no, I've got a better way. Fight the peer pressure. Fight the peer pressure. You need to account for yourself. You need to understand what you're doing. You're responsible, and you need to make a decision to follow. And you've got a much better thing to follow, and that's what he's saying here, much better.
Yeah,
Wes.
the book of Hebrews is so good. It's just so good. But I mean, he also goes further into the fact that he is in the actual Holy of Holies is so far superior to the copy in the tabernacle on the ground. This priest is able to go places no other priest was able to go because his perfect righteousness allows him to enter the presence of God in fact.
And it's so freeing. If you look at what they had to do, all the rules they had, all the sacrifices they had to do, all of these other things, all of this, and Jesus is actually giving a simpler system that actually gets you results. You know, why they have to keep, he'll be right back, Roland. Why did they have to keep doing sacrifices? Because it wasn't one for all to keep covering you. You had to keep doing it over and over and over again. And that's not what Jesus is offering. Roland.
Well, to me, we talk about being freed from bondage, and it really was, the system was bondage. It was a never-ending machine that had us requiring to just not only be confessing sins repeatedly, over constantly, and bringing them before priests, but to watch the slaughter of animals was a reminder of what I cost and how much bloodshed there had to be to get me right. We were freed from that with one sacrifice, once for all. Why would you want to go? Paul talks about going back into bondage. Why would you want to go back into bondage? This is bondage. He set us free.
Yeah, so there's a promise from that. And that basically answered the question I was about to ask. So, no, that's actually good. So just one final question here for you. So in light of all of this, what does it look like for believers today to approach the throne of grace with confidence? Why confidence?
As for me, as a self-advocate, I help run meetings, I help set up, tear down occasionally. But as for me, for conflict, timing is my conflict. And I always say, now, right now, not the right time. Maybe we can schedule ahead of time. When Wes was asking me to go see Anna Dyke, as much as I love you, Wes, I had to be in Salem from my self-advocacy of it. But if he switched it to another day that I don't have to be in Salem, then we could see Anna Dyke. My biggest passion is people with disabilities to advocate for themselves and for others. That's what I do. And besides serving God, I do volunteer 1 day a week at Father Moses, and I do that because I love God and I love serving for God and only God.
Yeah, so it's always good to serve God, and a lot of times that includes serving others. But I think after this comment, we've got Frank.
I was going to say, as far as confidence in approaching God, I kind of think back to the last time there was a child living in the White House. And when President Obama had his 2 little girls in the White House, they could go many more places in that building than I could. I can't even approach the front door. And I think about us now as Christians with Jesus' sacrifice, those doors have been thrown open. We are children of God, and we can, walk into the Oval Office anytime we want. We have a confidence that comes from belonging to God now that people who don't get.
Mm-hmm.
I can go in front of the creator of the universe anytime I want, and that's kind of a humbling thing when you think about it. He's not going to strike me dead. He's not going to hurt me in any way, which was possible with, like, when you think about the story of Esther and how going before the king is a really big deal. You don't get to do that, except we do.
Yeah, we do in this case. So let's see, I think that was our last spell. Let's end with Frank's comment. Make it good, Frank.
No pressure. So one of the things, the children of Israel, as all of us have been reading, depend totally on the priest making a sacrifice for them. And yet the priest they're depending on, Aaron, was error-prone. Nadab and Abihu, his kids, were error-prone and suffered for it. And just so many priests. And so why are we confident? This is Jesus. Our priest makes no errors.
That's a good note. Thank you for coming this morning. That's the end of class for this morning. Thank you.